There was always a white face somewhere, or 2 or 3, and sometimes even more on the buses.
Would the whites come to your house, or?
Yeah. We lived in the country, so we could do what we wanted to do. But most of the Freedom Riders were from, they were coming from New York and other places. They weren't just right there. And then I remember when they had the Million Man March, and they were coming to, they were getting a bus together and money together for us, the marchers, to come. And then once again, I was too young. So there you go.
So you didn't go to the March on Washington?
No, I did not.
Who were some of the leaders that were involved in your protest?
Marion, I'm trying to remember names now. There was my aunt, who's Mamie Johnson. There was a Mr. Smith who actually even ran for, I think he ran for town council or something. And a lot of what was done while we were marching, a lot of what the adults were doing was picking people and getting people together to be put on some ballot or another for some election that was coming up. So it wasn't just about the marching, it was putting people on. I mean, it would have been a miracle at that time if they had won. You kind of knew they weren't going to win, but you have to indoctrinate people with baby steps.
Mm-hmm.
So they had, they were on the ballot, they would get votes, but you knew they weren't going to win. But then people got used to seeing them on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
They got used to seeing us on ballots and whatever. Until now, we got the President of the United States. I mean, started somewhere, didn't it?
Right. Who would have thought, right?
Yeah, who would have thought?
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
So what other violence did you see growing up? Did you ever hear of any lynchings or mob violence?
No, I never heard of any lynchings at all. Never. Not in my area. Now, when I went to college, I heard a lot more graphic stuff than what happened in my area.
Now, where'd you go to college?
I went to Johnson C. Smith in Charlotte. And I was, when I was in school, growing up, we knew Martin Luther King. I didn't have a clue who Malcolm X was. I didn't know anything about him until I got to college. H. Rap Brown, all of them. I didn't know anything until I got to college about them. We were strictly going by Martin Luther King's doctrine, period. And when I got to college, of course, that's a melting pot of people from different places and different experiences, so you have more, you have more. But I can remember when I was there that Martin Luther King came to speak. And they had to he came in on an unused railroad, in a railroad car. It just wasn't safe for him just to come. They kind of diverted him through all kinds of things to get to the campus. And the surprising thing of that to me was I was a student and I was on that hospitality committee. So I got to see him and hear him. But the room was full of white faces. Full of white faces.
So what was it like hearing him?
It was mesmerizing. It was mesmerizing. He was a great speaker. You didn't even have to understand what he was saying. He was just mesmerizing.
Is that one of the main moments in your life, could you say, of the civil rights, was hearing him speak? Or what do you think is the most poignant thing that happened to you in all of your civil rights experiences?
For me, it was very personal. It was realizing why I was doing what I was doing. I didn't realize that initially. I was just going in field. I was just going to go Saturday morning. I was going to get up and go to infield. And when I got there, I'm thinking, oh, okay. Because, you'd heard about the marches and they were somewhere, buzzed about, and you heard about it across the pulpit in favor of or against it. You got both sides of that. And, but it was once I got involved in it that I realized that I'm doing something very important here. This is a good thing. This is something very important. And it was exciting. It was exciting. I mean, I'm from a little quiet town, and nothing ever happened. And it still didn't happen in my town. It happened a town over, which is Enfield is much bigger than Milton, and I guess that's why.
Yeah.
And then I think Cofield, that was a funeral home. I think some of the people that worked at Cofield Funeral Home actually were very instrumental in setting up the marches. And I know the house we went to, this Miss Mary Alice was the secretary there. I think she was the secretary. She did something there at Cofield Funeral Home.
Was there a large presence of NAACP? Did they have a chapter there in Enfield?
They had a chapter, yeah. The chapter, I think the chapter was out of Raleigh. I probably should have talked to my aunt about this before I talked to you. She would have known all these things.
That's okay.
I was a kid.
I want your experience.
I was a kid. I think the chapter was out of Raleigh.
Okay.
But I remember that was the first card I ever had with my name on it. And my address was my membership to the NAACP. That was my very first thing. And that I got, and they spelled my name right, and I was so impressed.
I love it.
Well, I'm Sallie, Sallie, and normally people spell it Y, Sally. It was spelled right, and I was like, oh, this is great. So from the time I was 15 until today, I've been a member of the NAACP. My aunt had to be my aunt, enrolled all of us, signed all of us up. And that was the very first idea I had.
Let's go back to something you said. You talked about over the pulpit. There was some instances of being for the protests and some against. And historically, we don't hear a lot about that. Everybody assumes that over the pulpit, there was this 100% participation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Before sermons, or even after, but usually before, there was always something said about the civil rights movement, about the marches and people sitting. And some ministers were against it. And I would think about that, and it seemed like the older the minister, the more he was against it. It seemed almost like you had to be in a certain age group to actually be okay with that, or support that, or push your congregation to participate in that.
Huh.
And my particular church, the minister was actually for that.
And he was younger?
He was younger, yeah. He was for that. Now, it doesn't mean to say that I'm Baptist. I'm Southern Baptist, so the deacon board runs everything. Doesn't mean to say that the deacon board was for it or whatever. Because actually, in my own home, my aunt was 100% gung-ho. My uncle was not. But he was not against the movement. We were girls, and we were getting hurt. And we were getting manhandled. And he was so opposed to that. So he would always say, y'all don't need to go now. You don't need, you've been enough. He'd name things that had happened. But, my aunt was very determined, and we were very determined. And we'd talk him around, and he would wait for us to get home and just hope everything was going to be okay when we got there.
So he never went to the protest?
He never went, not once. Not once.
Would you say the majority of the protesters were women, or?
The protesters were younger people, most of them. Most of them were younger people. So I don't know that most of them were women. You know, I think that probably it was equally so, depending on, you know, well, there are more women in the world, actually, so I guess. But it might have been more females, actually. But I don't think it was because the men were against it. Because most of them were younger, you know, 20s, maybe 30s, who were marching. Teenagers, and, you know, whatever. College-age kids, things like that.
How did your teachers feel about you and the other children protesting? Did they ever say?
Nobody else. We were the only people from my school that protested. We were the only people that protested.
Huh.
And there were people who were actually against that. You know, you have people who were actually against it.
Yeah.
Were actually against it.
Historically, history has written that all African Americans were for it, but not everybody was.
No.
A lot of it was fear, do you think?
It was fear. And they were not for the march. They weren't against progress. They weren't against change. They just were not able to participate in making that change happen. And then there were people who actually just thought, as in anything else, you know, there are some people who are very complacent and they think things are okay as they are. You know, and there were people like that. But we were the only students from my school who went.